I often hear people say that we don't do racism anymore, that that's one thing of the past. And I'm not sure about that. If you look at it as a cognitive process, I think it's pretty much something that's separable from racism itself, from race as a topic. The cognitive process behind it is that you basically ascribe agency to a group of people. You basically treat them like a spirit, a representation, an expression of one spirit. And a spirit is like a disembodied form of organismic unity. It is very much like an organism. So when we think about organisms or living beings, we think of organisms as having an appetite, as being driven towards something, as Whitehead put it, as having a drive, as having some form of motivation. When we look at an organism for us has some intrinsic unity. It's one thing. If you cut it in two, it dies, right? This is one of the most basic features of something being an organism. An organism also reacts to influences from the outside. So it is not just there, not just lying around, but it reacts as a unit, as one thing. It responds to environmental influences, and organisms can not only be just there and neutral, but they can be dangerous for us. In other words, their agency, their will, is something that can be experienced as dangerous to us. And that's what we usually take a spirit to be. It has those characteristics of an organism. It's very much like a living creature, right? But it is not embodied. It is not embodied in one single body. It is distributed. Its embodiment is distributed across all the individuals that are supposedly composing it. Very much actually like a human body. Like a human body is also composed of, if you want, individual parts that are being held together. And when we are thinking about spirits, when a spirit has taken possession of a group of people, it's holding those individual parts together as if they were the atoms and the molecules that are held together within an actual embodied organism. And that's what we do when we are racist. When we are racist towards somebody else, we place them into some imagined category of unification. In this case, it's the category race. And that category is not something that we look at as something neutral. For us, the race is not, oh, you're just different. You people just share this one characteristics that is making you different. But that category itself is an expression of a spirit, of something that has its own aliveness, if you want. In other words, that spirit has its own agency, that spirit has its own will, and that spirit, in a very specific way, is dangerous to us as human beings. It is a form of animism, I believe, at the heart of this way of thinking about reality. You're basically imbuing your surrounding with very human like, if you want, spirit, and you are associating people with it, whether they like it or not. I have just recently learned that supposedly I must be radical left because I've subscribed to certain ideas of progressivism. The same way that, for example, Joe Biden was labeled as being part of the radical left. If you look at the details of his expressions, it is very difficult to make that cohere with any idea of how he could be radically left. But that's the general tendency. As with racism, the moment we have a single cue that someone is part of that spirit that is facing us, they become labeled. They become put into that category whether they like it or not. And this is what we see happening today. It's not on the level of race, but it is on the level of still labeling people as being part of a group identity, as being part of a group spirit. The moment they show even the slightest signifiers that are reminiscent of what to us that group identity is actually about, then we don't care about the details of their individual positions. We don't care about how they came to their conclusions. We don't even care to think about what they actually mean with what they say. But the moment we start perceiving them as part of a group identity, we place them as being part of that group spirit. And just as we feel we have the right to destroy that spirit, since it is a danger to us, we feel we have the right to not treat those human beings as humans, as individuals, as having their own legitimate point of view, but we treat them basically as an extension, as mere parts of the body spirit that makes them up. And this way of thinking, again, is structurally exactly the same thing that racism does. Racism is not about race. It is about how you interpret reality in general. And it is about animistic projection of human consciousness-like features into the world. Now, this itself has, of course, functions that are, if you want, traceable. Racism itself has social functions. It creates a specific form of social dynamic which makes warfare possible on a large scale. You couldn't have warfare if people were not capable of thinking in this manner, if people were not able of projecting spirits into the world and assigning group identity and participation in those spirits. If we couldn't do that, we could never get together as human beings into group and fight against each other. In other words, if we were not capable of treating all the individual instances as instances of one, if you want, basic pattern or one spirit, we wouldn't be capable of waging warfare on a collective level in the first place. But we shouldn't confuse ourselves here and think that just because racism, as concretely being about race, might not be as relevant today as it was just a few decades ago, we shouldn't think that it's gone as a structure of thinking and a structural way of approaching reality. And again, this is something that you see on both sides, or on all sides, if you want, of tribal thinking. The other side is, of course, that when you just make a few sentences and immediately are labeled as fascist or as racist, ironically here, right? The immediate labeling of someone as being racist is an expression of the thought patterns that lie behind racist thought itself. They are tribal in nature, and not that a big deal. They're something that I think we can neutrally speak about as a process and simply become aware of when they are active within us and when they're actually moving through us without us not necessarily being even aware of the process itself.